Now you know what I mean. The backdrop, there's paintings, as opposed to had you been sitting behind, there could have been a door there, when somebody suddenly opens the door and looks inside. What's going on here?
Yeah.
So in the middle of an interview, a door opening and shutting could fracture the chain of thought or fracture the look. Because if I'm watching you on TV and suddenly I see a door opening behind, it speaks of, oh, what kind of office? Somebody suddenly coming in and going out, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
are we ready?
Sir, the white jacket barwate.
Okay, now if you look at it closely, the shirt, the jitter of your shirt is what the cameraman feels is causing too much of a jitter on the frame. So he recommends that you wear your jacket. I'll get you your jacket. You
Look nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As nice as it gets.
This is color separation, no? Black and white.
Yeah.
Are we ready? Generally, when you do interviews, you'll be looking at the person asking the questions rather than into the frame.
Yeah. So you never actually divert like this.
Never divert. You can divert generally a little bit of casual. The way when you talk to people, you can.
Yeah, but
Look
the,
in
the
there,
main
but
focus
the
is
main
here,
focus
and
is
you
the person.
basically ignore the camera, don't you?
Exactly. Completely ignore the camera.
Yeah.
Unless specifically asked to look into the camera and answer, which is rare. But otherwise, you're having a conversation with the person because the moment you're looking at me, then your full attention towards me, and I feel that you're attending to me also.
Sure.
So, are we ready, Thomas?
Sure.
Rolling. Thomas, good afternoon, and welcome to this exchange of thoughts and ideas and learning more about Vodafone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. An interesting phase in Vodafone. How long have you been here now?
It's only 6 weeks actually that I've been here, so it's fairly fresh still, and I'm still trying to obviously learn a lot about India and about Vodafone.
India and Vodafone. So Vodafone India, what's the most exciting thing that your takeaway has been in the last 6 weeks?
Certainly, I think when I came here, the really exciting thing was about actually how people were welcoming me, how open actually they were to really tell me about the things that they are doing, to give me really a hands up so that I could get actually into the real important things very, very quickly. So this is certainly a treat that Vodafone in India actually has here. And I think this comes actually very much from the Indian culture, where people are very, very warm, very welcoming, and it's a very energetic place as well. So this is fairly, very, very fascinating.
You enjoying your stay otherwise? Have you been trying out different foods and street foods, or has it been confined to safe zones of eating?
No, I always was actually very keen to understand actually the local culture as well. So, and I think there's a strong need then, if you want to understand the real culture, that you don't get into those areas that are just very safe and protected, but that actually you are reaching out to a more vibrant experience. So yes, absolutely, I've been experiencing a lot of the Indian food, and I actually loved Indian food already before, but here I must say it's even more difficult to resist from eating Indian food.
Vodafone has been in India for a very long time, either in the form of Vodafone or you could say Hutch also. So it's been over close to 20 years now that this company exists here. When do you think it will start making profits?
We are making profits already, and I think if you look back at the history of Vodafone here in India in the last years, actually that we as Vodafone Group now actually own this business. We've actually taken it through a lot of transformation, certainly. So we've made it a national business first and foremost. We've invested a lot into Vodafone India here as well. And we've certainly turned around the business from loss-making in some areas to now overall producing actually very, very healthy margins and very positive cash flows. So.
Are you happy with the kind of margins that the turnaround that you see from a loss-making in that sense to now a very healthy profit-making company?
Yeah, I think important is as well that we are still growing revenue very strongly here. So you are looking at a business that is actually a very successful business in the past in terms of the revenue growth and its expansion in that context. And I think we are continuing to grow now into the future as well, and that's what we expect going forward. And on that basis, still a growing business, actually the margins are very, very good, because obviously in a growing business you're investing, you keep on actually adding resources in order to get even further growth. And from that perspective, we are actually looking at very, very healthy margins.
Talking about the spectrum wave that's happening, the auctions, over 20,000 crores in rupees has been spent. Do you think you'll have overpaid in this space, spending so much money?
We certainly prepared, obviously, very thoroughly for this auction. And in our preparation, we actually did develop, obviously, a business case as well that was giving us guidance on actually how we would be bidding in the auction. And I mean, if you take that into account and you look at the result that we have here, we now look at the very healthy amount of spectrum that we have got. We have paid certainly more than everybody would like to pay for that, but it was still within the framework of the business case. So we were prepared to pay as much in order to get this very good position for the future, to continue to grow, to continue to strengthen this business, and actually to build on that success story that I was just telling you a moment ago about. So we are very happy with the result of the auction. Certainly paying less is always something that we would like to do, but I think this adds a lot of benefit to our organization.
It also adds a lot of pressure on your balance sheet, isn't it, paying that much? So how do you plan to offload that? Would it be the customer gets to gradually help you pay off all that money?
Well, if you look at the industry, then you actually need to realize that if you take our balance sheet into account, we are probably having one of the healthiest balance sheets in the overall industry. Some of the smaller players and some of the other players in general actually would have spent a lot of money in a situation where their balance sheets have already been much more loaded than ours. So if you look at that, we are probably the best positioned to obviously be able to shoulder this incremental amount of investment. So I think this is still a very healthy position that we are looking at, and it's not necessarily leading to us getting into trouble.
So much talk on FDI and the doors opening, etc. happening now. What's happening on the IPO at Vodafone? There's so much talk happening. One wonders, have you finally shelved the plans of an IPO?
No, absolutely not. This is still on the agenda. But whilst this is a very important project for us, we obviously need to think about a few topics as Vodafone as well before we will get there. So there's another spectrum auction coming up pretty soon, and that is something that we need to get out of the way. Why? Because this is a part of our existing spectrum that will be renewed. And when you do an IPO, you obviously want to be sure that you have an existing business that you can actually carry into the future. And the other thing is obviously the Vodafone tax case that is still there, that Vodafone Group is dealing with. But we as obviously Vodafone in India are affected by that to some extent as well. And we would like to make sure as a Vodafone Group that we have resolved this before we would actually enter into the further IPO discussions. But it's still definitely on the roadmap, and this is an important point for us in the future.
What's the timeline that you're setting for this?
It's hard to tell. It really depends on the outcome of the 2 points that I've raised to you actually before. But if this is resolved within the next 18 months, then I'm sure that in that time frame we could actually think as well about getting to a new phase of preparing for the IPO, and then obviously you've got to execute it. So within the next 2 years, this is thinkable.
Bharti has gone and taken over Loop. There's talks of Vodafone looking at Docomo from Tata's. So we heard advanced stage talks going on and number crunching going on that front?
Well, I think if you look at an operator like ourselves, then we certainly always need to be prepared for market consolidation. And if you look at the Indian telecom industry, then there's certainly too many unhealthy players at this point in time. Now, thinking about Tata and Vodafone, this is a thinkable combination. There are many more of that as well. Then you need to do always these business cases. As a responsible business, you need to be prepared for every eventuality. But I can't comment at this point in time whether Tata is really something that makes sense at this point. Again, I mean, coming back to one of your earlier questions about the healthiness of balance sheets. One thing that is in the way of consolidation at this point in time is certainly that there are players out there that actually have a lot of debt on their balance sheets. And before you would get into any consolidation matter, these situations would have to be cleared off.
Coming back to balance sheet, since you mentioned it, among all the players, do you all have the weakest balance sheet as of now? Would that be a fair assessment?
Sorry, who would have that?
Vodafone, is the Vodafone balance sheet the weakest one? Would that be a fair assessment?
No, absolutely not. I think we are looking at the strongest one, and we are obviously being backed by an international company that will continue to invest into India and are willing to increase that investment. So I don't see at all a risky situation or a balance sheet that is overloaded with debt in the Vodafone case. We are very comfortable with this.
What's the next big step that Vodafone would be announcing if one has to look at? What would your next big step be?
Do you mean that from a personal point of view or Vodafone India?
Vodafone India point of view?
From a Vodafone India point of view, I think it's continuing the success that we have been enjoying in the past and really growing from a customer number point of view, but continuing to grow then as well and getting really good customers onto our network and increasing our revenue market share. That's a real important goal for the future so that we benefit from the overall growth in the Indian telecoms market. So I think as a next step, really continuing the organic growth is really important.
Thomas, network seems to be a huge problem in this country, connectivity and network. How do you propose to solve that?
Well, Vodafone has already come out with proposals on that. So we are continuing to invest in Project Spring, over 3 billion actually in this market. And the bulk of that investment is going to get into the network expansion. So we already have very superior networks. We now will benefit on the one hand from the incremental rollout that this capital investment actually allows us to do. And on the other hand, we've been talking about the spectrum earlier on, and having that incremental spectrum will allow us to roll out even more efficient. So customers can look forward to Vodafone continuing to actually put new base stations, capacity expansion, and just an overall quality improvement of the network.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So, what was your assessment of the interaction?
It was very personal, I think. I mean, it was reacting in a very positive way. I mean, you obviously have been